You're listening to Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast.
When your heart is aching and your world is shaking, don't give up. No, no, don't give up.
Hello and welcome to Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast. I'm your host, Jana Short, and today I'm here with my good friend, Rhonda Salvestrini. And we're doing her series, her 4-part series on Let's Write with Rhonda. And this is the 4th of her 4 parts where she's going to wrap up all this amazing stuff you've been learning. Rhonda has been called an entrepreneur's coach of dreams. As a writing coach and ghostwriter, Rhonda Salvestrini is on a mission to help entrepreneurs and nonfiction writers kiss their stuck goodbye, find confidence in their voice as an authority, and be inspired to write bravely and fearlessly, bringing the voice of their brand to life. With her incredible wit and intelligence, she speaks life into people, making the writing process feel effortless and fun. Rhonda, I am so glad you're here, and I don't want this to be our last series, so I know we're going to do another one because you are teaching people so much. But thank you for being here, and how do you want to start wrapping this up?
Thank you, Jana. It's so fun when we do podcasts. I have such a good time with you. I love it. I think I want to wrap everything up. I mean, we've had this 4-part series where we've talked about the fear of writing and getting over those hurdles to really kiss your stuck goodbye. And then we talked about your audience and why it's really important to speak to them in their language and really be relevant to them so that you're engaging them and really inviting them in for a conversation so that they can learn from you and experience your expertise. And then we also talked about how content is your salesperson 24/7. It's evergreen and it will always be there when someone's searching for you. So you always want to make sure that you are putting out really intelligent content that's very intentional and really answers the questions that your audience is having. So now I really want to wrap it all up and talk about why your story matters. It's really important when you're putting out content that you're also relatable to your audience. So you want to make sure you're sharing your story. How have you experienced this pain, or how have you overcome this problem to find a solution? And that's in your story. And that's what really creates that rapport and that deep personal connection with your audience.
I love that. And honestly, I have learned so much about being human when I speak, being authentic in my voice and not trying to sound like somebody else, because it just never comes across very well.
Right. And I think a lot of times we get so sucked into the comparison trap. We look at somebody else's writings, or we think we have to sound like somebody else because in our minds they're relevant in our industry, when really our authentic voice is so much more impactful to our audience. It creates that really authentic connection, and it really shows your vulnerability and your authenticity. And that's how you connect really, really well with your audience. And so sharing your story is so much more important than just giving them information and just serving kind of as a portal. You want to be human when you're talking to your audience through your writing.
So I would just tell everyone, one of these little exercises I did was, I love being really vulnerable and honest in my writings because I'm at an age where I just don't care. So it's easy for me to be like, I don't care what they think. I just want to get my message out there, and I don't want to taint it trying to make it fit everybody's mold. And so I'm writing in the middle of writing a book. I've also do a lot of blogging, but I thought, what if I took this into my posting, my daily posting, and I created something beautiful, a beginning, a middle, and an end of a powerful story in a post. And I posted those, and I can tell you, I got more hits and comments on a very personal post of me and my wrinkles than ever, like ever. And so I realized that it's really important that when we're writing, it's everything we're putting out there. Mm-hmm. So when you create those blogs that you're talking about, or even you're starting a book, you can put those little tidbits of those little golden nuggets in there out there. It's kind of a great way of beta testing it and seeing how people are responding to it, right?
That's a great way to put it, beta testing for sure. We live in such an electronic world, digital. Having that human connection has gotten even more difficult with the pandemic. So we have to look at how we're really connecting with people. And when we let people into our world, we open up that space of safety for them to open up to us. So again, it's creating that relatability, and people want to know that they're dealing with a human. They just don't want to feel like they're just getting information shoved down their throat. They want to know that you empathize with their pain, that you've experienced it, and that you really can help and understand their motivation, where they're coming from, that you've stepped into their shoes to help them.
I totally agree. And I think when we show our scars and we show our journey and we make ourselves more relatable, like we know what you're going through because we've been there, right? We may not know the exact journey you're on, but we can feel some of that pain and empathize with it. So don't be ashamed of falling down many times in your business, right? And having to get back up. The important part is you get back up. Don't be ashamed in sharing that. Oh yeah, I tried that. It was very hard. I've tried writing a book. I don't know how many times I've begged Rhonda. Like I had the first 2 books I wrote, I could not do it alone. I had to bring in other authors and like have a collaboration. This is my first one. And for all of you who write books, I applaud you. It is really hard to stay focused, to be sure your message is really what you want to get out there. So I applaud you in that. What are some of the tips that you would be talking to or sharing with people who want to start being authentic and get past that stuck and be braver in their voice?
I think first and foremost, you mentioned a word that is so important, and it's shame. We carry a lot of shame when it comes to our story, and Brene Brown talks about that a lot. But we also don't want to be embarrassed by putting our content out into the world, because it's a very vulnerable place to be when we're sharing our story. We're sharing a piece of us. You and I have talked about it, how you open your kimono when you're sharing your story. So I think we have to recognize that we won't be embarrassed. And if someone's going to say something snarky or nasty, they're not my audience. They're not who I'm trying to target. Because the people who appreciate what you're writing will recognize you for who you are, the information you're delivering, and they will continually seek you out for your input and your perspective. So it's one, to get over that fear of embarrassment, that fear of sharing your voice with the world, that fear that you have nothing to say, because you are an educator. So you have so much to say based on your experience alone. And I like to tell my clients to use the existing content that's out there as inspiration, because your knowledge, your genius, your expertise is going to fill the gaps of information and just make the topic that much richer and just more in depth and better sourced and more intelligent. So it's just, you have to put that aside. And don't get me wrong, I get frightened as well. And sometimes I'll let an article sit for a week just so I can noodle with it. But at some point, I finally have to say, okay, Rhonda, enough is enough. Publish it out there. What's the worst that can happen? Nothing. Nothing. Nothing bad is going to come of my putting out an article teaching someone how to write. That's really how I come to that conclusion.
You are honestly blowing up all over social media, because I am seeing you on Clubhouse. I am seeing you on podcasts. Like, you're really getting a very powerful message out, and we all have a voice. And I don't care what your story is, it is powerful to someone out there. And so if we're holding that inside us, it's really kind of doing an injustice to the world. And by the way, it's freeing, right? It
is so freeing. And I always say, what good is your story if you're too afraid to share it?
Right.
Once you open up, like you said, those floodgates, it's the acceptance, it's the validation, but you are helping somebody else. And if you're only helping one person, that person is going to share your content with their tribe. and with their community. So you'll be helping maybe one more person. So it's all in the reach that you're gaining. And you're going to come across people you never would have thought would have reached out to you. And that to me is what's so exciting, is when somebody says, oh, I read your article. Or what I have found to be even more exciting is when somebody writes a blog article about something I've talked about, written about, or taught them about. That in itself speaks volumes. And so when you let go of your fear and you really find your courage to share your voice, magical things happen.
It really does. And you're like, oh, nothing bad happened.
Nothing bad.
There's this funny thing that I do, which reminds me about sharing your story, or makes me think of it. But when we're working in a group and someone puts out a post, what do I always say? Go in and be like, I call them fluffers, but I know there's probably a more appropriate word for it. But when you're in a chat room and you're talking, and for instance, I was talking on breast cancer, and it was to a bunch of women. And I asked if there were any questions. There was none. Come on, we all have breasts. I know that we have questions, but nobody was saying anything because they were afraid. They were afraid to put their fears out there. Right. So I quick text my daughter, and she was in the group, and I said, can you do me a favor and just start asking questions? She started asking questions, and the minute she showed that it was okay to ask questions, you weren't going to be judged, it was a safe space, people were there for you, the floodgates opened and we couldn't stop the questions. So if you unlock that beautiful message inside of you through a blog, through a post, through a book, and you put your story out there, you are going to unlock the floodgates for so many people.
Right. Right. It's beautiful. I like to think that it's magical. I mean, when you see that you've made an impact, when somebody says, I am a fan of yours, there's something about that that gives you this little umph, if you will, and you want to write more, and you want to share your story more, you want to share your expertise more. And so sometimes maybe having that little bit of validation, of course, helps, but finding it within yourself is one of the most empowering things that you can do, especially when it comes to writing, is to know that you are an expert and know that you have something to say.
I love it. So let's go over just briefly the steps that we've gone over to start to get past that stuck, because I know what that feels like. Yeah. I can feel it inside bubbling up, but the first few words, right? Like, it's scary. Where do I start? You don't even have to start at the beginning. I've learned this. You
don't, which is so magical. I love that word magical, because when it comes to writing, as you can see, I get really nerdy about it. There's just so much. I mean, you can start in the middle. You can start anywhere you want. And really, it's where you're finding that passion. And so I like to say one of the first things to really get over that stuck is to give yourself permission. I think so many times we talk ourselves out of it. We find our little safe space of complacency. We figure that nobody wants to hear what we have to say, so we just say, well, we're not going to do it. We have self-doubt, we have frustration. But when we finally give ourselves permission to speak our truth, to share our voice, again, the floodgates open. And it's knowing that you are writing for a purpose. You're not writing for the sake of writing. You're not writing to entertain yourself. You're writing to educate somebody else. So number one, I always say, is give yourself permission. And one of these things that I know you've done, Jana, is you've created a dedicated writing space, which is your lovely chair that you received for your anniversary. And I like to tell people to really dedicate a space. And for me, I don't know, sometimes I like to have a lot of noise around me when I'm writing. It just draws you in, and it's almost like you're enveloping it. You're going in, you're shutting the door, if you will. You're blocking everything out, and you're saying, for the next however long, say 30 minutes, I'm going to write. And so it puts you in this different mindset. It really just says, this is all I'm going to do for the next 30 minutes, if you will. And you can just really dedicate that time in your dedicated space to being productive and to writing. And I think the key thing, I mean, I've got all of these tips, but you really want to overcome your overwhelm. So one of the best things you can do is break your project down into smaller steps. Writing is a very scary thing to do. So if you say, okay, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes and just outline my piece, that's all you have to do. You're taking all of this overwhelm out of it, and you're breaking it down into much more attainable tasks, things that you know you can do in a short amount of time without feeling like you have to write a 2,000 word article in one sitting. And so it just alleviates that stress and alleviates that fear and allows you to really be intentional and productive.
I love that. I know for me, a couple of tips that you gave me worked really well. People are saying, I'm not a writer. I've sucked at writing in school, right?
Yeah.
But you have a story and you have a voice. And I felt the same way. I'm not a writer. Oh my God, the putting it on paper just freaks me the heck out. So I sat in my chair and I did my outlines, right? And I started getting the juices flowing. And I thought about, what is my message in this chapter, right? What do I want them to walk away with? Then I backed up. How did I get to that, right? And then after I got those juices flowing, I turned on my recorder and I recorded, because I can tell a story. And who can tell it better than the person who lived through it, who felt those emotions? And I would tell my story. And then when I'm back in my chair, I think about the next chapter. What am I saying in this chapter? This is what it's about, because I've outlined it. And what do I want people walking away feeling from it? And then I back it up and I try to do 3 steps to it, right? That was my process of doing it. Some of you are geniuses and you don't even realize it. And the story in you is huge. And so I can't wait. But I will say, sharing my story blew my business out of the water. It literally put me on the top of the map, just sharing my story. And I didn't do it for years because I was ashamed of being sick. Who's ashamed of being sick? It wasn't even my fault. But I was ashamed to say I was weak, I was sick, I was frightened, I was giving up. I was afraid of saying all those things. And when I finally didn't care, and well, I actually did care the first time, but when I saw how impactful that message was, you couldn't shut me up.
I think the beauty in that too is that so many people feel alone. They feel afraid. And again, that word shame, they feel ashamed. And when you shared your story, somebody out there said, holy crap, she's been where I am, or she's gone through exactly what I've gone through. How has she made it to the other side? It becomes relatable. You're right. It's scary to share your story. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've shared the story multiple times where I've been on the floor in the fetal position crying because I didn't like the way my thesis was written. So I started over. It's just, we have to share our stories. We have to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability is going to allow us to connect to so many more people very authentically, truthfully, and just in the right way.
I love that. I'm just going to put this one out there too. I worked with a client who, she wouldn't share a story. And I'm all about being authentic, getting your voice out there as your brand. That's your brand, not a color, not a logo. It's you. And I couldn't break through. And finally, one day on a call, she broke down and told me that she was a convicted felon from when she was in high school. From when she was in high school, she was a doctor. She was a therapist, and a huge therapist. And she was ashamed to share her story. I'm like, why? Why would you be ashamed? You were a kid. We all make mistakes. And what about the kids right now who gave up because they made a mistake and figure life's all over? And if you share your story, you're going to relate to so many kids thinking, I made a mistake and my life is now done. There's no hope for me to have a beautiful future. You got in school, you fixed the mistake, and look where you're at now. She shares her story now, and it is an explosion around her. But I understood that shame because I was shameful of being sick.
And as soon as you talked about her being a therapist and one of a convicted felon, I mean, it adds to her story. It adds to who she's become. It adds to her journey. There's so much richness there. And so I think having that it gives people hope as well. And I mean, come on, Jana. Oh my, there's hope. And so people need hope. And when they see that you've gotten to the other side, when they see that you've taken this journey, while it might be a little different, it's still the same. It offers hope. And so sharing your story is really, really how you connect with your audience so much more authentically than if you just stay in kind of this business mode.
Can I tell you, first of all, thank you for doing this series. This is honestly one of my favorite series I've ever done. So I'm sorry for all of you who've done series with me. They're all amazing. But I feel when you release your story and put it out in the world, the massive change you create, you may never even see it, but I promise you there's this beautiful ripple effect of change going out. So if you're sitting there thinking, I have a story and I'm on fire to tell it, but I just don't know how, or I'm not brave enough, I want you to connect with Rhonda. I want you to dig into this series. I want you to connect with her because she made it easy for me. Because even though I've been telling my story, I was never brave enough to put it in a book. I could do a little chapter, or I could do the mini version, but now I'm writing more, right? I'm giving more of myself out there into the world. So if you have a story to tell and you're on fire, like you just have to get out in the world, you don't have to do this alone. Right. So she is an incredible source. So Rhonda, how can people connect with you?
Please reach out to me on my website at rhondasalvestrini.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm holding a series of some pieces on Clubhouse, and so my handle is Let's Write. And I want to connect with everybody and understand their journey so I can help them really kiss their stuck goodbye and share their voice with the world.
I'm telling you, it's a game changer for your business, for your brand, for who you're connecting with in the world, because now they see you as authentic. They see you with your dings.
Yes, yes.
And yet you're still kicking it. So get
all
out
your
there.
Dings. It's great. Yeah.
What do you say? Get out there and open your kimono to the world.
Open your kimono.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. This has been such a blast.
Thanks for listening to the Oh My Health, There Is Hope podcast. Make sure to visit Jana's website, bestholisticlife.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, or listen there, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you simply tell a friend about the show, that'll help too. Let's change the world together, one health expert at a time. Looking forward to seeing you next time.